Thank you. I'll talk without slides this time, which is unusual for a professor in university and so on, but I scribbled some notes. They're not kind of a well-structured talk, but more like a few points that in the, basically in the 30 years since early 1980s that I've been involved in this process to try and bring science to people who are in the decision processes, be it in government or in business or in NGOs or lower, let's say, local governments. But I start with two quotes that I've used frequently because they stuck in my mind. One is very long ago when I worked at IIASA for the first time, which was from 84 till 87, and we did the first work on the range model. Very simple thing, only sulfur, very linear, not much flexibility, just a few fixed scenarios. But then there was a Dutchman who was the leader of the Dutch delegation to the Montreal Protocol and later also the air pollution negotiations in Geneva. And he said to me when he came to a review meeting of RAINS, where we got scientists and policy people together in 1985, he said in Dutch, but so I translate it into English, what I need from you guys is not a recipe, but I need a menu to choose from. I think that stuck in my mind because we are, at least in my background also, doing a lot of optimizations, and at the optimization comes an answer. And that's basically what we think the policymakers should follow, because that would be the best for them in our perspective. But he said, I need the scope, I need a series of options. Then I'll discuss those options with my fellow policy people. And in those days, that was, let's say, Western Europe and Eastern Europe involved, Soviet Union, Hungary, and so on. That's one quote. The second one comes from Norman Neureiter, who most of you have heard when you've been here at this conference. I got him to the Joint Research Center in Ispra, which is one of the sites of the Joint Research Center in northern Italy, where there's about 1,700 scientists. And he spoke in front of a packed auditorium in his well-known, eloquent way, with lots of examples. But there's one quote that kind of shocked my colleagues a bit, because the mission of the Joint Research Center is to do research which directly feeds into the policy development of the European Commission. And then he said, science is only one input into the policy process, and it's a minor one. Think about that and say it maybe also to IIASA people. That's another one I think we have to realize when we do this type of work, bringing science to decision makers. So in my experience, there's a few things that need, few conditions more or less, that have to be fulfilled in order to at least be able or to have a chance of success when bringing science to policy, into the policy process. First is to know the playing field. And going back this almost 30 years of IIASA's air pollution and greenhouse gas work, the playing field those days was the Economic Commission for Europe, not the European Commission, the Economic Commission for Europe of the United Nations in Geneva, where the first discussions took place on reducing air pollution. The term was acid rain at that time. And the playing field, of course, was an east-west playing field, very much so. So just ignoring that, and ignoring the fact that economics is different in the UK compared with Romania or the Soviet Union, and all kinds of other differences, that playing field, ignoring that would have been, of course, very, very difficult and would have reduced the chances of ever being used to zero. No, the controversies, and there are controversies not only in science about were the trees dying because of acid rain or was there something else? Is acid rain a hoax, as some Dutch newspapers wrote last year? When it turned out that the forests were still there, they thought that had all been a hoax. They forgot that the emissions had been reduced by 80%. What are the stakes in the different countries? The stakes between the different players within the countries. Countries are not homogeneous. The ministries of environment might do the negotiations on air quality, but it's the ministries of, say, energy and transport and so on who have to implement it. So there's controversies in the nations as well when you're involved in these type of international negotiations. And then all the players, all the different players, big groups being together, be it in Brussels for negotiations, be it at the United Nations Conference of Parties for climate. There is a lot of players. And then in addition to the chair's point of timing, when I heard that, I all of a sudden wrote down luck. Because it's, for us, I think when I look back, there's also a matter of that indeed of timing, being at the negotiation table with your messages, etc., but also being lucky to find a few advocates amongst the negotiators, amongst the parties that are around the table that say, yes, there is something in this. And in the case of IIASA's work in air pollution, which is cited so frequently as being successful, I always say be a bit modest, because at that time, of course, it played an important role that IIASA was this East-West institution, but also that there was a Canadian Minister of Environment who pushed it very much, that there was a Polish negotiator, and there was the, let's say, the Russian negotiator, that all three said, there is something in what IIASA is doing, let's give them an opportunity to talk to the negotiators. So timing and also luck. Then, in addition to what Helga said, and more relevant today, I think, than 20 or 30 years ago, is that the role of science will be disputed more and more. ClimateGate is not the first example of this. When you look at other topics like the GMOs, the attitude, the policy making, the legislation in North America is very different from Europe. I just saw in the JRC, one of our meetings a few weeks ago, that somebody had made a chart of the results of voting in the European Parliament on GMOs, just by coloring yes or no's for the 27 member states. And then there are 3 member states that voted always no whatsoever on whatsoever GMO question. And that's not that the science was different in Austria or in Luxembourg, but that there is a different perception. And so it's not only science, it's perception, it's how the country feels about things, that is then also leading to disputing the science. The same you see happening now in biofuels. It's not undisputed anymore. There's talks about new generations of biofuels. We have a lot of debate about what is the climate consequences of biofuels, current generation, next generation. And it's not only the scientists that speak there. And I notice now also working in Brussels that the input of science is one, and an important one. But the proposal that's coming out from Brussels, which came out last week, is a negotiation between the Commissioner for Climate and the Commissioner for Industry and Energy. So, what's it? There's one other point that I would like to include here. That is that science cannot deliver a lot of direct products. If we are expected to bring 100% certainties, that Helga already said, but we're not delivering ready-made products or jobs next month. And quite frequently, in our let's say, interaction with decision makers, that's what they're most interested in. Innovation is the buzzword in the European Union at the moment, and innovation is expected to take place next month and deliver jobs next year. There's a few more points which I'll bring to the discussion later on.